Hello and welcome back to goldstocktrades.com. Today we have a returning guest with us, Corey Diaz. Corey is CEO of Anfield Resources, which can be traded as ARY on the TSX Venture and as ANLDF on the OTC QB. Thanks, Corey, for being here with us today.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your time.
It's an exciting time for Anfield Resources. We've seen recently an uptick in the uranium price in the uranium sector, and highlighted by financings. Recently, you were able to have a financing which was oversubscribed and showed a lot of interest. That I know that you had to raise your the financing because there was so much interest. Could you talk to us about this sort of rebound in the nuclear sector and how Anfield has recently benefited from that?
Sure, Jeff. I think that last year was a very difficult year for the uranium space. Uranium price continued to slide down below $18, and I think there were a lot of question marks about the viability of the market in the longer term. But I think in general, when we look at where uranium prices have been historically, everybody understands that even $17 or $18, there's no way for production to take place, at least profitably. And I think that the general realization, kind of early this year, when Kazakhstan came out and said, we're going to be cutting our production by 10%, given where the uranium price is today. I think that really shook the market up, and the market started to understand that regardless of how cheap production can take place in Kazakhstan, there is a point at which there's not a sustainable production profile worldwide that would allow for production at very low prices. So with that in place, you saw the price move from below $18 up to $26 in a fairly short time period. So it obviously emphasized to the market that there is such a thing as an extremely low price and an unprofitable price. And even at $25, production still isn't starting up. We're still a far way away from where the price has to be for sustainable production. But certainly, the signal was that the price is way too low in general, and there's no way that production is going to be viable at very low prices. So when you've got parties coming out and saying we're stopping production, Cameco did the same thing. When you see nuclear facilities being built, in anticipation of being able to feed those properties using material in the marketplace, it provides kind of a positive view. But at the same time, production is declining or slowing down, given the Kazakhstan news, given Cameco. So you start to see, this split between supply and demand, demand growing and production slowing down. So, right now we're at the point where the market's starting to recognize the fact that it's going to be very difficult for material to be sourced where the price is today. So, inevitably there's going to have to be an uptick in price in order to, get people back into the production sphere, because it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Corey, I've been following the nuclear sector for many years now, including the junior mining sector, especially in the U.S., which is the largest consumer of nuclear power and yet really does not produce right now a lot of uranium. We relied on this imported uranium from Russia, but that may be changing over the next few years. I'm wondering if you could talk to us about your recent acquisition of 24 uranium projects in Wyoming, which we know is a lower cost in situ area, where there was a company called Uranium that we followed that had a lot of success. Talk to us about the recent projects that you've acquired and the recent resin processing agreement with Uranium One, which many of my subscribers remember from years ago, which was bought out by the Russians.
Sure. And I think you made a very good point. The U.S. is the largest consumer of uranium worldwide, and yet imports between 90 and 95% of its needs. So the production sector in the U.S. is fairly small, and given where uranium prices is, not particularly sustainable. There are a couple of companies that have contracts in place, which allow them to produce at current prices, but the contracted prices are significantly higher than where the spot price is. The risk for those companies is that those contracts will end in the next couple of years, which means that those parties will be exposed to the current spot price. So unless there's a significant move, the market could get even smaller in terms of producers in the near term, which means that even a greater percentage of production will have to come from outside of the U.S., which is not an ideal situation. But in any case, our view when it comes to production, we are a party that wants to be on the cusp of production, but not necessarily in production while uranium prices are so low, because it's not profitable at current levels, especially in the spot price. But in any case, our plan is to move forward in Wyoming. As you mentioned, we acquired 24 projects from Uranium One at the end of the summer 2016. These 24 projects have a historic resource of 37 million pounds. And, the plan here is to focus on a lower cost area, which is Wyoming, where production currently takes place, and to move those projects forward to the point where we can actually drive production from Wyoming. It's a lower cost opportunity vis-a-vis our Utah projects. As I think you mentioned in the past, that we have a 1 million pound per year conventional mill in Utah. And that was our first foray into the marketplace. But it's only one of 3 uranium mills in existence, licensed, permitted, and constructed in the U.S. So I think that's an important point. But secondly, we have 2 different paths to production. The Wyoming assets are more of a near-term, lower-cost opportunity, but certainly the blue sky lies in the Utah assets. But secondly, the resin processing agreement that you touched on, that is a significant agreement for us because it allows us to produce 500,000 pounds per year at Uranium One's existing processing plant, which means that we forego any capex associated with building our own plant in Wyoming, and secondly, the time frame within which to build a plant, which could be anywhere from 6 to 8 years, is bypassed. So we think that's a significant deal for us. It means that we can get into production as quickly as we can move our mines forward to production ready. So we think it's a very significant move and a great opportunity for us to move forward.
Yeah, and I've seen before when a company signed this resin processing agreement, when your Honor signed it with Cameco, it was very significant for the company in the past. So yes, it is a significant announcement. And when you look at Anfield compared to many of its peers in the sector, where you have both ISR production, near-term potential in the U.S., plus the conventional production in the U.S., and with a presidential regime that is pro-nuclear, could you talk to us about having both ISR, both conventional, and how you compare to your peers, and talk to us a little bit about the permitting with nuclear in the U.S. and how that can maybe be improved?
Sure. I think an important point, just going back to the resin processing agreement for a second, the fact that we have the ability to buy and borrow material from Uranium One as part of this agreement is very important to us. Utilities are looking for alternative supply, not just Kazakhstan, but also company by company or by country. The biggest concern for utilities looking to contract with a small producer is the fact that there's a risk associated with that producer actually getting into production. The fact that we have a backstop of Uranium One, which is top 5 in terms of production worldwide, it helps to mitigate that risk. So we are able to sign contracts today to provide material this year because we have the ability to buy and borrow material from Uranium One in order to fulfill contracts. So I think that's a very important point. But going back to this idea of how permitting, how difficult permitting is. I mean, there are obviously challenges in the marketplace, depending on which state in which you operate. Wyoming right now is run by the federal level oversight committee, which it takes a little bit longer than, say, the state level. We have assets in Utah, and we deal with the state when it comes to licensing, permitting our assets, and it's a much quicker process. Wyoming is actually on the verge of switching from a federal oversight position to a state oversight position. I think it recognizes the fact that they need to be able to move much more quickly and nimbly given the state of the uranium market or any other resource-related market in the U.S. And I think that despite the fact that it is a challenge, or a bit more challenging in Wyoming, most of the production that takes place when it comes to uranium takes place in Wyoming. So having both, a regulatory framework which is much more producer-friendly, and having a lot of projects there, it means that the opportunities in Wyoming are opening up and becoming even more appealing.
Corey, you recently announced addition to the management team. I was wondering if you could highlight the management team and some of the key players behind Anfield Resources.
Sure. I'll mention we just hired Scott Lumadou. Scott Lumadou is an individual who's had about 38 years of experience in kind of nuclear-related industries. He spent a number of years with Converdyne. Converdyne is the largest converter of yellowcake in the U.S. He also worked for Duke Energy, which is one of the utilities, one of the larger utilities in the U.S. He spent time with New Mexico, which is a uranium trader back in the early 90s, and he spent a few years with Uranium One, working in the uranium sales and marketing group. So he has a great deal of experience. He has very strong relationships. He knows the utilities well. It's a very insular industry, and Scott is well liked and well respected by his peers within the group. So we are very happy to have him on board, and we think that he's going to be a great addition. He's a person who we think we can certainly help us open the doors to utility contracts going forward, and we're excited to have that opportunity to work with him in that regard. We also have a fairly strong board. I think that we have about 100 years of experience on our board, including Don Falconer, who has sat on the boards of Energy Fuels, Uranium One, has also run a uranium company in the U.S., publicly traded company, and finally also worked for Ontario Hydro Generation, which is now Ontario Power Generation. It's a nuclear it's a public utility which obviously is involved in the uranium space and the power space. He also spent time working in the nuclear division of Ontario Power Generation, about 7 years, and he spent a great deal of time writing sales and marketing contracts. So that's a plus for us. We have Toby Wright, who spent over 20 years working in the uranium space. He does a lot of our environmental and regulatory work. He's well known and well respected in the industry. So he is a significant help to us when we're dealing with the state when it comes to licensing and permitting concerns. Jim Rasmussen has over 40 years of experience in the uranium space, has worked for Energy Metals, which is one of the genesis of a lot of the other companies that are in the uranium space, a lot of the assets that are owned by various parties, Your Honors, EFR, Anfield. These are assets that Jim has looked at from a geological perspective in the past, and he's worked for Uranium One, so he's very familiar with the assets that we've acquired. So he's a great addition. And then we have Josh Bleak, a young entrepreneur, has spent a great deal of his time in the mining space. He's a fourth generation miner out of Arizona. Parents, grandparents worked in the uranium space. Great-grandfather worked in the mines, and possibly some of the mines that we've acquired in Utah. So he's our on-the-ground person, operational guy down in Arizona. He's close to all the assets that we have, and he's a great person to have on board too. So We have a very strong board, each with their own strengths, but certainly the collective, we believe, covers all facets of our needs as we're driving from our current state to production.
Corey Diaz, CEO of Anfield Resources, which can be traded as ARY on the TSX Venture and as ANLDF on the OTCQB. More info can be found at AnfieldResources.com to get more information. Thanks, Corey, for being here with us today on GoldStockTrades.com.
Great. Thanks, Chad. We appreciate your time.